The week our quarterly numbers went final, my director told me to sit near the front of the all hands. Just trust me, he said, like he was doing me a favor. I'd been running one of our ugliest product lines, an add-on module everybody called mature, which was corporate code for, it still prints money, so don't touch it unless you want to get blamed when it breaks. I'm not the kind of person who needs applause. I like clean systems, clear owners, and problems that stay solved. That's why they kept handing me the work no one wanted, and why I kept believing that if I fixed enough chaos, someone up top would eventually notice the difference between available and valuable. A year earlier, that line was bleeding in quiet ways. Discounts were random. Renewals were treated like favors. Sales promised features support couldn't deliver, and support cleaned up the mess until customers stopped believing any of us. Every quarter, we'd slap on a patch, call it strategy, and move on. Then leadership started whispering the word that makes everyone sit straighter. Restructure. In our company, restructure didn't mean improvement. It meant someone was about to lose a chair when the music stopped. People got polite. Calendars filled up with alignment. Managers started talking about efficiency, like it was a virtue instead of a warning. The moment I heard it, I did what I always do when the ground shifts. I measured everything: churn reasons, renewal dates, exception approvals, the hidden cost of every one-time discount that somehow happened 3 times. I printed reports and highlighted patterns like I was studying for an exam that could cost me my mortgage. My director, Calvin, liked to talk about vision. He loved saying words like synergy and North Star. I liked to talk about math. Somehow, that made me the person who got the assignment. Fix it, he said. Clean it up. Make it scalable. Do that, and you'll be next in line. I believed him because I wanted to, because hope is cheaper than cynicism, and I was still paying in hope back then. I didn't do anything heroic. I did boring, brutal work. I rebuilt the pricing tiers so sales couldn't freestyle. I forced discounts to go through actual approvals, with names attached. I rewrote renewal language so we stopped giving away margin just to avoid conflict. I mapped handoffs between sales and support and made people own what they broke. It wasn't glamorous. It was me in conference rooms with stale coffee, watching people argue against accountability like it was oppression. It was me writing policies that sounded simple until you tried to enforce them on people who were used to getting their way. The ugliest fight was with our vendor. We'd been sleepwalking through a contract that punished us every time we grew. Every time I raised it, someone shrugged and said, "That's just how it is." I pushed finance to renegotiate anyway. I sat in calls where grown adults tried to win by exhausting you, talking in circles, forgetting details, acting like basic math was a personal attack. I kept showing up with numbers and silence until the other side ran out of theatrics. Outside of work, my life got smaller. I ate dinner over my laptop. I answered emails in parking lots. I told my friends next month, so often they stopped asking. On Sundays, I'd open my calendar and feel that tight, familiar pressure in my chest that says, "You're living inside someone else's priorities." Month by month, the mess got smaller. Tickets dropped. Renewals got predictable. The exceptions stopped being special cases and started being what they always were. Someone trying to skip the rules. By the time the year closed, that product line's profit was roughly double what it had been. Not by magic, by discipline. And it wasn't just the profit line. Support escalations fell. Sales stopped losing deals because we'd finally made our terms consistent. One of our biggest customers, one we'd almost lost, renewed early, and their procurement-led actually thanked us for finally acting like a real company. So I waited for the normal adult thing to happen, a real compensation conversation. Instead, at the all hands, Calvin called my name like I'd won something. People clapped while I walked up. I saw coworkers smiling at me, the way you smile when you think someone's life just leveled up. I saw my manager's manager in the back, nodding like this was a success story he could repeat later. Calvan handed me a framed certificate of appreciation and a company-branded pen. Not even a nice one. A pen with a cheap clip and a little sticker on it that still said $10. He leaned into the microphone and joked, "This is what excellence looks like, proof we reward performance around here." Everyone laughed. The room applauded again. I smiled because that's what you do when your boss is watching, and because there's a special kind of humiliation that comes from realizing you're being measured by how well you swallow it. But in my hands, the frame felt light in a way that made my stomach heavy, because I understood the message immediately. This wasn't a thank you. It was a test, a way to find out what kind of employee I was going to be. Would I be the kind who accepted symbolic praise as payment? Would I hang that certificate behind me on video calls, like a trained animal showing off a ribbon? After the meeting, Calvin pulled me aside with that polished grin leaders wear when they want your gratitude to do their budgeting. "Great moment," he said. "Good visibility for you." I kept my voice calm. "How does this translate to comp?" He chuckled, like I'd asked something childish. "Let's not make it transactional," he said. "You're building your brand. The money follows." He said it so smoothly, like it was wisdom. Then he walked away to shake hands with people who hadn't lifted a finger on that product line. I went back to my desk and set the certificate down. Someone had already placed it upright, like it belonged there, like it was the end point. On my screen, the profit dashboard I'd built was still open. The numbers were real. The work was real. The reward was paper and a pen. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the HR portal and looked at my own profile. Title, pay band, bonus, eligibility. The quiet rules they never say out loud, but always follow. And when I saw what I was actually coded as in the system, my throat went dry. Because the certificate wasn't the insult. It was the cover. And it meant the next conversation was going to hurt. The next Monday, Calvan scheduled a quick sync. 10 minutes on the calendar. That's how you know it's not a real conversation. Real conversations get 30 minutes and a closed door. 10 minutes is where they try to steer you without leaving fingerprints. He didn't waste time. "Great quarter," he said, leaning back in his chair like we were celebrating together. "Leadership's impressed." Then he slid a thin folder across his desk toward me. Not paperwork, not official. Just a printed one-pager with bullet points. "Next focus areas," he said. "We want you to take on the second line as well, temporarily, just until we stabilize." I looked at the page. It was the struggling product line that had been failing quietly for 2 years. High churn, ugly margins, constant escalations. In other words, another mess. I kept my expression neutral, but my brain did the math fast. 2 lines, 1 headcount, same pay band, same bonus ceiling, more risk. "I'm open to expanded scope," I said, "but I want to discuss a level adjustment." Calvin's smile tightened, like he'd expected the words and already disliked them. "We don't do spot adjustments," he said. "It creates noise." I nodded once. "Then we can discuss a variable tied to the results. The profit increase was measurable?" He waved a hand as if I'd brought up something impolite at a family dinner. "Don't make it transactional," he said again. Same phrase, like it was a company value instead of a tactic. I didn't argue the philosophy. I asked for process. "Okay," I said. "How do comp reviews work specifically? What metrics matter and when is the cycle?" He gave me fog. "Annual planning," he said. "Budget timing, equity considerations, total rewards framework." Words that mean nothing when you're the one doing the work. Then he nodded toward my desk outside his office where, somehow, the certificate was now standing upright, visible from the doorway. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't even touched it since the all-hands. "Besides," he added, "you've already been recognized." I felt my jaw tighten for half a second. I made myself relax it. "A certificate is recognition," I said. "It isn't compensation." Calvin's eyes flicked to mine, and I saw irritation flash through the professionalism. "You need to be careful," he said, quieter now. "You don't want to become difficult." That word is poison in corporate spaces. It's the label they use when you stop smiling while you're being used. It's how they warn you without admitting they're warning you. I held his gaze. I want to be aligned, I said. Alignment includes scope and pay. He stared at me like I was missing the point. Then he softened his voice like he was doing me a kindness. Look, he said, I'm trying to protect you. People upstairs don't like when someone makes everything about money. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because it wasn't funny. It was clean. It was obvious. People upstairs loved money. They just didn't like paying it. I stood calm and professional. Send me the scope in writing, I said. I'll prioritize accordingly. I left his office and walked back to my desk, feeling something I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Because if he could call me indispensable and still treat my compensation like a nuisance, then this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a design. That afternoon, I didn't rage text anyone. I didn't vent to coworkers. I didn't post on social media. I did something quieter. I started collecting receipts. Not in a dramatic way, in a responsible way. I exported the profit dashboard that showed the year-over-year change. I saved the finance approvals for the pricing tiers. I downloaded the vendor renegotiation chain with the final terms highlighted. I pulled the renewal uplift policy with the legal sign-off. I created a personal folder at home and stored copies, the way you store documents for taxes, because someday someone will pretend they don't exist. 2 days later, the real confirmation arrived from somewhere I didn't expect. Marissa from finance messaged me, "Congrats again, crazy results." I replied with a simple thank you. Then she sent one more line, like she almost deleted it before hitting send. Calvian's bonus is going to be huge. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I stared at that sentence long enough that my screen dimmed. I didn't want to ask what she meant in writing, so I walked down to her floor under the excuse of getting a signature on a forecast. She handed the paper back and kept her voice low. "I saw the allocation summary," she said. "Your turnaround is being counted as his leadership win. That line is carrying his scorecard." I felt my stomach drop, not because it shocked me, because it explained everything. The certificate, the pen, the don't make it transactional, the push for more scope. It wasn't just that they didn't want to pay me. They had already decided who would get paid for my work. I thanked Marissa and walked back upstairs, moving slowly so my face stayed normal. At my desk, I picked up the $10 pen and turned it in my fingers, and I realized something I should have understood years ago. If they can turn your work into their bonus, they can turn your silence into their strategy. That night, I didn't stay late. I went home on time for the first time in weeks, sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop, not to work, but to plan, because I was done being the person who saved a sinking ship for a souvenir. And I hadn't even seen the worst part yet. I didn't quit that night. I didn't storm into Calvin's office with speeches either. I did something colder. I stopped donating the parts of my life the company had been taking for free. The next morning, I showed up on time. I worked the exact scope in my job description. I answered what I owned. I fixed what I controlled. And when someone tried to slide an urgent problem onto my desk that belonged to a different team, I sent it back, politely with the name of the actual owner copied in. Nothing dramatic happened at first. That's the point. When you stop being the shock absorber, the machine doesn't explode right away. It just starts making noises everyone's been ignoring. Within a week, I watched those noises become meetings. Sales complained that discount exceptions were slowing deals. Support complained that promises made in demos were still being treated like contracts. Finance complained that the new pricing tiers were too rigid, which really meant they couldn't hide the margin leaks anymore. Calvin tried to put the chaos back on my shoulders like it belonged there. He started forwarding messes with subject lines like "quick eyes" and "need you," as if naming me was the same thing as assigning me. He forwarded an email late at night. "Need your thoughts before morning." I replied the next day with a clear answer and a line he hated. Happy to prioritize. What would you like me to deprioritize? No response. Then a calendar invite. Alignment. You're the fixer, he said in that meeting. That's your value. I kept my tone flat. My value has a price. After that, he pushed the temporary second product line again. He sent me a spreadsheet labeled Interim Ownership, with my name already typed in the owner column. I didn't delete it. I replied, I can support a transition plan, but ownership requires role and compensation alignment. Please confirm how you want to proceed. That was the first time he stopped smiling around me, and then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. 2 days later, Dana from HR pulled me into a check-in. Dana was smiling, but her notebook was open. That's how you know the smile is not for you. Calvin says you seem disengaged, she said. I kept my voice steady. If there's a performance issue, I want specifics. In writing? Calvin cut in. No performance issue. It's more about attitude. Attitude? The word they use when the numbers are fine, but you've stopped being convenient. My role produced the profit increase you celebrated. I said, if the company wants expanded scope, compensation has to align. Dana glanced down. We can take that feedback. Calvin leaned forward. This isn't about money. I looked at him. Then stop using my time like it's free. For the first time, Dana's smile flickered. She wrote something down, slowly, like she didn't want to be caught writing it. That afternoon, a customer escalation hit my inbox, an angry thread from sales, support, and a regional VP, all demanding I step in immediately. The issue wasn't even in my lane. It was a promise sales had made months earlier and never documented. Old me would have jumped in and patched it. New me read it once, took a breath, and replied with 3 lines. Who owned the commitment, what the next action was, and when I'd be available to review the outcome. Within minutes, Calvin called my phone. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, he sounded furious and scared at the same time. That night, I stopped being the hero, not in some dramatic vow, in a quiet, adult decision. I opened a document and wrote 2 lists, what I had fixed with dates and approvals, and what I'd been blocked on, delayed on, or asked to be flexible about, so someone else could avoid accountability. The list of blocks was longer than it should have been. The next week, I saw why. Marissa from Finance invited me to a meeting titled QBR Narrative Alignment. I wasn't supposed to be there. Someone added me, then forgot to remove me. Calvin presented his slide deck. Big arrows, big words, turnaround, operational excellence, leadership focus. And right under the profit chart I built, he'd typed, guided by Calvin's strategic direction. My name wasn't on the slide, not once. I didn't interrupt. I took screenshots, saved the deck link, and left. Later that day, an internal email went out praising Calvin for elevating performance through decisive leadership. People replied with clapping emojis and generic compliments. I stared at my screen and felt something snap into place. This wasn't personal. It was a harvest, and I was the crop. It told me I was no longer negotiating with Calvin. I was negotiating with a system that preferred loyal silence to measurable results. And I realized the system only moves when it smells risk. So I built risk, legally, professionally, quietly. I started documenting everything the way an auditor would. Not emotions, facts. When I approved a discount exception, I wrote the rationale in the approver. When sales tried to bypass the tiers, I saved the request. When Calvin asked me to just handle work outside my scope, I replied with timelines and trade-offs. And I updated my resume. I didn't make it a dramatic manifesto. I made it a record of outcomes. Stabilized renewals, reduced escalations, renegotiated vendor terms, doubled profit. I reached out to 2 former colleagues who'd left the company the year before and asked what they were seeing in the market. One of them, Ben, laughed in that tired way people laugh when they've learned something expensive. Don't threaten, he told me. Don't hint. Don't warn. Either negotiate with a signed offer or accept your role as the mascot. Mascot. That word sat in my chest like a stone because the certificate on my desk suddenly made perfect sense. 2 weeks later, a recruiter called about a role in the same space. Different company, cleaner structure, real authority, real variable comp. I took the call in my car during lunch and heard myself sound calm, like I was finally talking to a world where effort and reward had to touch at some point. The process moved fast. Interviews, case questions, a conversation with a director who asked, "If you fix a broken line, how do you keep it from breaking again?" I told him the truth. You make the exceptions visible and expensive. When the offer came, I printed it and read it twice at my kitchen table. The base was higher. The bonus was explicit. The title matched the responsibility. It wasn't life-changing money. It was respect, written down. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, listening to the quiet in my apartment, realizing how tense I'd been for months without admitting it. That night, I looked at the $10 pen and the framed certificate and realized I'd been taught the wrong lesson about gratitude. Gratitude is for people who choose to help you, not for people who profit from your restraint. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Calvin, not to beg, to give him one chance to correct his mistake. And I didn't know it yet, but the moment I clicked send, the whole building started shifting. Calvin showed up to our meeting with the kind of calm that only exists when someone still thinks you need them. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask what I wanted. He opened with the story he'd already written in his head. "I heard you've been taking calls," he said, voice light. Exploring options, I didn't correct him. I just placed the offer letter on the table between us, face down like it was a fact and not a threat. "I got an offer," I said. "I'd prefer to stay if we can fix the mismatch." His eyes flicked to the paper. He didn't touch it. He didn't want his fingerprints on reality. He leaned back and smiled like he was about to teach me something. "Let me guess," he said. "You want a promotion and a big raise because you had a good year." I kept my voice steady. "I want compensation aligned to the scope and the results." He exhaled through his nose, almost amused. "We can't do mid-cycle adjustments," he said. "You know that." I nodded. "Then I'll take the offer." That's when his expression finally changed. Not anger, not disappointment. Something sharper. The instant he understood, I wasn't negotiating for feelings. "Don't be rash," he said. "We can talk to finance. We can make something work." I watched him try to rewind time with words. "You had months," I said. "You gave me a certificate and a pen." He flinched just slightly, like I'd said something impolite instead of true. Then he reached for morality again because it's cheaper than money. "I thought you were mission-driven," he said. "I thought you cared about the team." I looked at him for a beat. "I cared enough to double the profit," I said. "That's not a mission, that's labor." His jaw tightened. "So you're leveraging me." "No," I said. "I'm giving you a choice." I told him exactly what I would need to stay. Title aligned to the responsibility, a variable tied to the profit increase, and written scope boundaries so temporary, didn't become permanent without pay. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes. He did what managers do when they want to delay without admitting it. "Leave it with me," he said. "I'll see what I can do." I stood up. "I'm giving notice," I said. 2 weeks. And for the first time since the all-hands, the room went quiet in a way that felt honest. But that was just the beginning. By noon, the chaos started. Not because I was sabotaging anything, because I was the person who had been quietly holding too many threads in his hands, and the moment leadership realized those threads had an end date, everyone panicked at once. My inbox filled with quick question messages that weren't questions. They were dependency confessions. Sales wanted to know which discounts they could still promise. Support wanted to know who could approve exceptions. A regional VP I'd spoken to twice in my life suddenly wanted a strategic walkthrough of the renewal process. Calvin didn't call me. He didn't want anything in writing. Instead, he sent Dana from HR. She scheduled a transition alignment meeting, which is the corporate version of putting a glove on a knife. Donna smiled. Calvin sat beside her, hands folded like he was trying to look patient. "We need to ensure business continuity," Dana said. "I agree," I replied. "That's why roles need to be properly staffed and compensated." Calvin cut in. "This is exactly what I mean. You're making it transactional." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move much. "Work is transactional," I said. "You've just been getting a discount." Dana's pen stopped for a second. Then she started writing again, slower. "They asked me to document everything, not just my process. Everything I'd ever touched. They wanted a full handoff of the invisible work I'd been doing for free. I said yes to what was fair and no to what was opportunistic. I'll document my official scope, I said. For anything beyond that, I can do structured training sessions if we agree on an extension and a consulting arrangement." Calvin's eyes narrowed. Dana's smile tightened. "You're asking to be paid to do your job," Calvin said. I looked at him. "No," I said. "I'm asking to be paid for the jobs you added and never compensated." The room didn't explode. It didn't need to, because the next day, finance got involved. I got an email from Marissa. "Heads up. Leadership is asking attribution questions." Attribution questions. That phrase sounds harmless until you've been inside a company long enough to know what it means. It means someone important asked, "Who did this?" And the answer they were given didn't hold up. An hour later, a calendar invite appeared from the finance director. Profitability, narrative review. Calvin wasn't on it. That told me everything. In the meeting, the finance director didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't flatter me either. He just asked clean questions. "What changed?" he said. "What levers moved the profit line? Who approved them? Where are the controls documented?" I answered with facts. I shared the timeline. I showed the approvals. I explained the pricing tiers, the exception framework, the vendor renegotiation, the renewal uplift language. I pointed to the emails with names attached. The finance director kept nodding, expression unreadable, like he was building a picture he didn't enjoy. Then he asked the question that shifted the air in the room. "Why wasn't this attributed to you in the quarterly narrative?" I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just told the truth. I wasn't writing the narrative, I said. I was doing the work. After that meeting, the tone of everything changed. Calvin stopped pushing transition plans. Now he wanted alignment again, which is what people say when they realize their version of events is collapsing. Dana emailed me later that day with a completely different posture. "We're prepared to discuss an extension agreement," she wrote, "to support continuity." Now there was money. Now there was urgency. Now the pen and the certificate suddenly looked like what they were, an opening offer in a negotiation they assumed I'd never start. Then legal joined. A short, sterile invite landed on my calendar. Knowledge transfer and risk review. The attorney didn't threaten me. He didn't need to. He asked questions that sounded polite but carried weight. "What information are you taking?" he asked. "None," I said. "Everything I built for the company stays here." "Are you planning to contact customers?" "I'm not taking customer lists," I said, "but relationships aren't property." He paused, not angry, just recalibrating. "And if asked," he said carefully, "how would you describe your role in the profit increase?" I could have performed humility. I could have softened it to protect Calvin. I didn't. "I would describe it accurately," I said. Silence. Not awkward silence. The kind that happens when a room realizes the safest answer is no longer the one they want. The next morning, Calvin requested a meeting with me. This time it was 30 minutes. This time he showed up early. When I walked in, he didn't smile. "We can offer you something," he said quickly. "A retention-style payment, if you stay through the quarter and help train the next owner." I waited. He slid a paper across the table. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't what I asked for. It was a concession dressed as generosity. I read it once and looked up. "That's not alignment," I said. That's you buying time. His eyes flashed. You're being unreasonable. I leaned forward slightly, calm enough to scare him. No, I said. I'm being priced correctly for the first time. Then I said the sentence that made his face drain of color. If finance and legal are asking attribution questions, I said, this isn't just my resignation anymore. This is a governance problem. Calvin stared at me like he wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Because we both knew what happens when a board starts asking why a profit turnaround was carried by one person who's walking out the door. And as I left the room, my phone buzzed with a new email from Dana. Subject line, extension agreement draft. I opened it, saw the first paragraph, and felt something I hadn't felt since the all hands. Not anger, control. Because the company that gave me a $10 pen was about to pay me like they should have from the start. And Calvin was about to learn what happens when you try to cash someone else's work like it's yours. Dana's draft wasn't framed as an apology. Companies don't apologize when they can write a contract instead. It was clean and clinical, a short extension past my resignation date, a defined set of training sessions, a single intake channel for questions, and a consulting rate that finally matched the fact that I'd been carrying more than a title. I read it once, then again slower. Not because I enjoyed it, because I wanted to make sure there was no trap hidden in polite language. No open-ended availability, no vague as needed, no clause that turned my expertise into an obligation without an end date. I replied with edits that were just as clinical. Specific dates, specific deliverables, a cap on hours, a statement that I wouldn't be responsible for outcomes once the handoff period ended. And one line I insisted on, because it mattered. Any narrative describing the turnaround would reflect the actual decision owners and implementers documented in the approval chain. Dana didn't argue that one. She just sent the revised version to legal. 2 days later, the agreement came back approved. The first payment hit my account before the handoff even started. That's the part people don't understand until they've lived it. Money appears the moment your absence becomes expensive. Calvin avoided me after that, not because he was suddenly respectful, but because he'd lost control of the story. He couldn't pressure me without creating more documentation, and he couldn't keep pretending he was the author of the turnaround, while finance was reading the footnotes. During the handoff week, I ran the training sessions like I ran everything else, structured, recorded, and impossible to misquote. I walked the new interim owner through the pricing tiers and the exception framework. I showed support exactly how renewals were meant to flow. I explained the vendor contract changes and where the risk lived. Every time someone asked me to just handle one more thing, I pointed them back to the process. No drama, no heroics, no free labor. On the second day, the finance director joined a session and sat quietly with his camera off. He asked only 2 questions at the end. Is everything documented? He said. It is, I replied. And did you ever receive a compensation adjustment tied to the profit increase? No, I said evenly. I received a certificate. He didn't laugh. He just said, understood, and left the call. The next morning, Marissa messaged me one sentence. Board asked why the narrative didn't match the approvals. I stared at that line and felt the strangest thing. Relief, not because I wanted a person to fall, because I wanted reality to be heavier than politics, because I wanted the world to work the way leadership always claims it works. On my final in-office day, Calvin asked for 5 minutes. He caught me near the elevators like he didn't want witnesses. He tried one last tone, soft, disappointed, almost fatherly. You could have handled this differently, he said. I didn't bite. I handled it professionally, I replied. He shook his head. You made it bigger than it had to be. I looked at him for a second, then spoke calmly. It was already big, I said. You just didn't think it would reach anyone who mattered. His face tightened. For a moment, I saw the person underneath the manager, someone who'd built a small kingdom on other people's extra effort. and genuinely believed it would hold. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen and went still. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. He walked away without finishing the conversation. A week later, I got the update through the same informal pipeline that had warned me about his bonus in the first place. Calvin was transitioning to a new role outside the business. That's how the company phrased it in the announcement. A few glowing sentences, no details, a polite applause email thread. People in the comments wrote things like, "Thank you for your leadership and best of luck." Nobody wrote what everyone was thinking, because corporate language exists to keep shame from having a name. Dana emailed me later that day from her work stress with a subject line that was almost human. Closing the loop? She wrote that they appreciated my professionalism and that the company was reviewing recognition and attribution processes going forward. Then she added a line that told me everything without admitting anything. You were right to ask for alignment. I didn't respond with a victory speech. I replied with 2 sentences. Thank you for confirming. I wish the team well. And I meant it. I started my new job the following Monday. No stage, no applause, no certificates. Just a director who opened my first one-on-one by asking, "What do you need to succeed, and what should we stop doing that wastes your time?" The first time someone thanked me there, it came with a budget approval and a clear scope. Recognition tied to action. Respect tied to reality. A month after I left, I cleaned out an old drawer at home and found the $10 pen. I'd kept it without thinking, the way you keep a receipt you don't remember taking. I held it for a moment, then put it in a cup with spare keys and random junk. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Because the lesson wasn't work hard and they'll notice. The lesson was simpler and a lot colder. Some places don't reward value. They harvest it, and if you let them, they'll clap while they do it. I didn't get revenge by yelling. I didn't win by humiliating anyone. I won by becoming the kind of person who doesn't accept symbolic gratitude in exchange for measurable results. They tried to pay me with paper and a cheap pen. In the end, I walked away with my time, my dignity, and a contract that proved they always knew what I was worth. They just didn't think I'd make them say it out loud.